Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and I wanted to take a moment to just cover a few pieces of Shadowkeep that I still feel are missing, and in some cases, big time. That said, let me go over this caveat real fast for those already going into the comments section to tell me I'm a negative Nancy and should shut up and don't care about Bungie and blah blah blah. One, you're wrong. First, Shadowkeep is a lot of fun. There's plenty to do and plenty to grind for. I will say, though, that there are cases that are a little too easy to get some of that loot, in the case of Vex Offensive and some of the stuff from Eris, but it's kind of an argumentative point, and of course if you make things too easy, too hard to get, there's always going to be people on that fence. I get it. Loadouts are in a better place than they ever have been, I would say, and besides some gear that still needs a bit of tuning, which I'm going to go into a little bit, I'm going to say it's the best the game has ever felt. This is meant to keep Bungie more on their toes and make sure they know what we, or at least myself, haven't forgotten that other activities existed in Destiny before with Destiny 2 and Destiny 1, and we haven't seen really a lot of mention on some of them even coming back. There are some that have, I'm still going to cover those today, but not as heavy. At least I think so. So I hope you put your pitchforks and torches down, because that's not at all what this is about. I also feel I really shouldn't need to state this in the current year of 2019, but, you know, we know how the vocal subset is of certain things when it comes to anything negative is a bad thing. Understand the difference between criticism and negativity, please. First off, let me go over this one real quick and get it out of the way, as I know it's being worked on, and I know it's planned for later, either this year, in seasons, I don't know. Though, I know they've also promised us this before, so that's another reason I'm keeping on their toes about it. Trials. As much as I wasn't a big fan of the game mode back in Destiny 1, or just didn't really have a constant group to build with each week and keep playing the mode with, I was pretty alright in PvP in D1, but there was something about Trials that never really clicked for me. I understand that competitive has also pretty well killed the scene, and that there's an argument to be made that comp is the new Trials anyway. I also realize that they need to balance some means of getting powerful gear and different gears to us as players, but really, it's a looter shooter, and game modes are just gonna be that. Even if you add in some of the old armor from D2 Vanilla, I think that would be fine, because we haven't seen those looks in a very long time. Still, I know a lot of the issues with Trials centered around a lot of the gear and weapon balance that the title had, and arguably still has issues with. You know, things like Uriel's gift being ridiculously broken back in the day, and so on. D2 Vanilla was a bit like that, but I'm glad that some pieces are getting paved out. I'd also be highly remiss if I didn't mention this one. Balance of weapons and some armors has been very good, but how they overlook Recluse and One-Eyed Mask is beyond me. And of course I know there are other exotics and weapons out there that they need to tune and figure out that are highly overused, and that's really the overall issue here. But those, I think, are two of the biggest ones that are kind of like the poster child for the problems of the meta. They've already hit OEM with a bit of a tune, but it still seems to require another, and Recluse being untouched. Here's what bothers me about lack of tuning with this. Bungie claims and bolsters that they have tons of stats that they go by, and they're able to make decisions with those stats based on constant use or something else that just outweighs the other weapons and armor that we have at our disposal. We also have a mean to check snapshots of these stats with subsets of the player base thanks to Destiny Tracker. Seeing how often the Recluse is used in PvE and PvP is actually pretty incredible, and that should be hint enough, at least I would think, that it is a weapon that's popular with the player base. I mean, obviously it is, and for a weapon like that to be used in PvE and PvP should also say something. But there's a difference of popular with the player base and this weapon is used far too much in comparison to the rest of its specific class type, and this is where my argument for both OEM and Recluse settles in. I have no issue with these pieces of equipment being powerful. I have no issues with these pieces of equipment being overused. It's the same debate as what had happened with the items that granted super back in the day, like Skull of Dire Aham, Kara, and the others that fit the bill. I have issue with the weapons and equipment in similar slots not feeling as powerful. This kind of goes back to the old statement of what happened with Whisper of the Worm and how it needed to be knocked down a few pegs. My personal opinion was similar to those that were even saying it didn't need a nerf. It, simply put, outclasses every other weapon in that slot when given the few chances that it excelled. It didn't excel in PvP, but it sure had its place in PvE activities, like Shattered Throne and the raids. Anyway, I know that this debate can go on for a while, and I'm probably dragging up a couple of old wounds with the Whisper of the Worm thing, but I'll sum this up. There are two ways to make Recluse and OEM work at their current state. Bungie can either smack them both with the Nerf bat, or they can attempt to bring other weapons to the same caliber as they are. I also understand that a shotgun can still trump most of these without issue, and that, yes, there are counters. I would just like to feel powerful at the same level, using other equipment more than just one or two sets of weapons and armor. And I get that getting Recluse anymore isn't that hard. I'm not going to say that it is. But it is still a matter that it needs to be looked at, as other weapons just can't stack comparatively in that same frame. It's just a mid-range monster. Anyway, as that is the extent of my knowledge on the Crucible aspect of Destiny, I think I'll move on from there. I'm definitely more of a PvE player in a lot of things, but that's where I think we're missing some key pieces that are just making me scratch my head, more in the PvE realm of everything. I'll go up my list, because the big one that I have here is, well, it's still kind of baffling and damning on Bungie's part, if I'm at all honest. First off is more of a what the hell were you thinking moment, and that's the forges. Before Shadowkeep's release, you were able to go to any of the 4 forges and select them. Granted, you had to sparrow out that way or run if you're mad enough, and then begin the activity. When you go to the nodes now, nothing. Nothing happens. They've added this point in the EDZ to select one of the forges, but it rotates on a daily basis. This means that you're setting people into a rotation that they have to fit to per day, depending on the activity and what they are looking for. This also means that you have to log in per day and hope you don't miss the one that you're after, and that was something that you were trying to get rid of to begin with. It makes getting Le Monarch, Izanagi's Burden, and Jotun a real hassle every single week for those that may not have played in the past year, and it's a real head-scratcher. There was no need for this change, at all, and it only serves to confuse and cut off rather than give options. And let's talk about that for a second, because I know that some out there will say the ultimate goal was to cut down on the activities that we can do for power, etc., etc. ad nauseum. So you're telling me I got power from running each forge at least per week? Or was that held up with Ada 1 in the tower and based on her bounties? Yeah, that's what I thought. In addition, I should add this in because it was a point that I didn't write down. Bungie is also trying to make this game into an MMO. This is the opposite of making it an MMO. It is the opposite of the functionality of an MMO. All functions, all activities are usually available to me, and I get to choose what I want. The idea of taking it away because the game can't be that big is obvious bullcrap. They still have the forges in, they're taking the nodes away. So at that point, it doesn't get rid of any of the process. It's backwards. It's entirely backwards. And even for an MMO sense, again, it's backwards. There was no reason for this change at all, and each forge should be selectable from orbit. That should be the absolute end of it. If you want to do anything else, then make Bergusia the only forge that you leave available, since you can make any of the frames there. But if you ask me, that's a damn shame after the environments in each forge alter, and the fights can also change a bit too. It would just be like you're taking away the work that you've done. You had the nodes on the map before. I won't feign to know code or know what went into things, but for me, that would have been the goal, to make all 4 forges and those nodes just simply selectable from the director. Do not do this again. You also made mention that you would be cutting off one of the Gambit modes, either Prime or the regular one, but you never did. I can assume that was a design decision after you kind of thought through a little bit more and said, nah, maybe we'll leave this be, or maybe you are thinking of it now and I'm here to stop you on that one because that would also be a bad idea. You also added in the ability for us to replay any story we want to, and that's great. As you have shown in several ways, you make very good design decisions, and I hope that this one can remind you which direction not to go. And to support this argument even further, outside of just the replayable story mission nodes and so on, you made the Shattered Throne open every single week. We should be having an easier time accessing the activities that we paid for in prior years, not a rotating event calendar. It just seems pointless to me. And that was my least heavy topic. Moving on. At this point, I want to actually return to the days of Destiny 1 at the moment, just to revisit a couple of old things that were taken from us previously. One of those is Armsday. This is more of a stupid comment, I guess, more than much else, but I always enjoyed the idea of Armsday. Every Wednesday, you could see what weapon was there. If you wanted to roll something, you could get a fusion rifle and hang on to the token until you saw the roll that you wanted, so on. To me, that was always cool. The system needed a few tweaks, ones I think that Black Armory has shown are possible with the schematics and blueprint system, but I found the system to be pretty cool, even as a weekly, non-powered drop. It just made rolls a bit nicer to farm sometimes, and reintroduced some older weapons that were pulled from D1's original loot pool. I know Banshee's doing some different things lately to help us put together stuff like Thorn and Mida and give us a bunch of enhancement cores, but I do find the lack of this activity a bit silly. It was just fun. Also, I feel Armsday would give more reason to reintroduce the city foundries again, since that seems to be something of a pattern with Bungie's design model, as we generally use equipment from outside of the city instead of trusting and working with the stuff that we have within the walls anymore. From a lore standpoint, that also doesn't make a ton of sense. And it's not like they said, well, Amalon's foundry was bombed in the Red War, so they're not around anymore. No, they're still there and working, which is obvious from exotics that you've made and given to us, Bungie. Unless that was just something that you didn't think about at all. Lastly, is my big anger moment. And let me demonstrate this by going back to the tower in Destiny 1. For those unaware of these vendors, let me show you in Destiny 2. This is Lakshmi 2. This is the vendor for a faction called Future War Cult. This is Iraq Jalal, the vendor for Dead Orbit. And this is Executor Hideo. We don't talk about him. Alright, fine. He was the vendor for New Monarchy. In Destiny 1, I used to be able to go to these vendors and turn in some planetary materials, weapon parts, special and heavy weapon synths, motes of light, stuff that you don't even see in Destiny 2 anymore, I might add as well, and several other items that could rank up my favor with these factions. The small lore reason here was to help bolster your faction, and in turn, you get equipment from them that you could kind of customize your Guardian with. Each of them had emblems that were emblazoned with the faction you were with, and they had some slightly different looks behind the reskins that they ran previously. It was kind of cool, at least in my opinion. It was great for farming rolls for armor, and they had this super awesome class item you receive from each of them if you leveled them up to rank 25. Now, I know for the game being this old, rank 25 would have been easy cakes considering how the system worked back in the day for tokens and all that stuff. But that's where it made things difficult to get these ranks because it wasn't nearly as generous with the rank ups back in Destiny 1, and cutting into those resources was a pretty big deal. Oh, and not to mention if you actually leveled up all three of them, which you could also do per character, that was also fun. I'm not going to say we don't have a whole ton of equipment and armor options available to us per this point. I know we have the planetary vendors of Devrim, Failsafe, Asher, Anna, Sloan, etc., but all the armor and weapons that used to be from the factions were reskins of older model weapons that were found and enjoyed by players before, and it added a slight bit of fun to run around repping the faction you cared for, even if per character or per account, like in my case. And that's just it. I knew they were reskins. I knew there was nothing special about them. But it still gave me something else to grind for, and to get roles and looks that mattered to me with philosophies that I could agree with or challenge within the game itself. And for a lore nerd, there wasn't much better than that. I mean, Hell, there were ships, sparrows, and ghost shells you could get from them too. And those were, of course, outside of Eververse. Yeah, okay, I'm a little salty with that, I'll admit. I have no issue supporting you with Eververse, Bungie, especially as sold everything as you are, but still, there's got to be a better point here that you can start to distribute that stuff. It's cosmetic, but that's what we're here for, let's be honest. Also, add lore back onto the ships, please, at least. If you don't want to put them on the sparrows, fine, there's not as many of them, but there should be tabs on everything exotic, I think, at this point. There is no reason to not bring up old stories, at least, especially like Rose and Bone used to be. I think that's one of the best examples. And of course, this system is gone from Destiny 2. We kind of got the same thing with the faction rallies previous, but, and I don't know if you noticed, they're gone. They haven't been added back into this game. They haven't altered, really, how this system worked from Destiny 1 previously to begin with. In fact, any mention of the factions themselves seems to be pushed out from any talk in the lore, minus a few small pieces that were said in the early days of D2. But it seems they want to sweep them under the rug and not make them a worthwhile thing to think about. I don't mean to make that sound malicious on Bungie's part, but it's really hard not to think they want nothing to do with them anymore. Again, as a lore nerd, this is a big spit in the face. The factions represent a lot within the city, and they were given a lot of praise for their part in getting people out of the city when the Cabal attacked in the Red War. And now they're just sitting there. Literally. They were something I cared for very much, and I know I wasn't alone with that. I remember all the banter, even before faction rallies, of FWC versus New Monarchy, of Dead Orbit versus FWC. It was always FWC getting picked on now that I think about it, but let's be real. I know when I am. Do you? Anyway, you have 3 important story-based NPCs just sitting there, doing nothing, looking at us and wondering why we even bothered showing up. And as I typically do in these videos, I bring up the criticism, but I'm also going to give you a solution that I see, and I hope you think it over. Add them back in, permanently, just like Destiny 1. Give us the ability to use these vendors again. Add in armor and weapons that are reskins again, with alterations to make the faction's general philosophy fit. Add them in with just the emblazoning again on them. Do something in that regard. Like Spider, let them accept planetary materials, legendary shards, something. Something to allow us to gain favor with them again. Take out the ornaments if you care to from them entirely, to make the armor that they have stand out even more. Take out the catalysts they may have had in that system, which you already kind of have, and introduced into other elements within the game. Add in their exotic class items for those that really care for the faction they were with. But make that representation matter again. If I'm at all honest, I run the Drifter's gear, Ada's gear, and other full sets because of which vendor's philosophy I tend to agree with. If I ever change from that set, it's usually for a small amount of time before I'm back to showing off the colors that I want to fly, or the look that fits best with what it is that I think at the time with the character that I'm running. Being that we're in an MMO setting, again, I've got to drive this home, that doesn't surprise me. It's why you put items behind the Eververse, and you know it's why you do. We love to customize our characters and make them look flashy or different. So please, do something with these characters that I've covered I don't know how many times on this channel that continue to be a driving force in the politics of the city and the hearts of Guardians everywhere. Again, it's this pattern that Bungie seems to be on to cut out what we used to know from the city. It's a bit disheartening. Have some pride in what the city does again, Bungie. There's no reason not to. We can bother with Daddy Callus all we want, even though we'll most likely blow him up in the end anyway, but at least, for the love of God, give us something important in the city again. And I'm not vain or ignorant or naive enough to know that this is going to take art time and spend extra time on these vendors. I know there's code time for these vendors. I know there's balance that needs to be spent on these vendors' weapons and their acquisition. I don't expect this change overnight, but I do hope that it's being thought of. In addition, None of these activities and events I have mentioned here would be things outside of our general activities already in place. None of them have to be for power gains. They could just be there for fun. I don't think that's much to ask. Anyway, I could carry on any of these points and their importance to me personally. These vendors, these activities, and some of the equipment we've been without, all of them are important mentions for Destiny, either for its lore or its original gameplay. I also would love to see them added back into the game, and I still feel it important to hold Bungie accountable for the game they're working on, regardless of how things might be going right now. I think with how easy it is to acquire gear right now from Vex Offensive and Eris Hive tomfoolery, that's another reason why I see factions coming back now would be even better. This is not to say only these pieces are missing right now, but they are the major ones, the ones that are stuck in my head most of the time whenever I start to play. I hope they resonate with you a bit too. I'm not sure about all of you, however, and I hope that this video helps you remember something from D1 or even early days of D2 that's not around us anymore. I don't want for this to turn into a screaming match, even though I know how some tend to be on the internet, and I know that I tend to be very passionate about my feelings as well. Be constructive in what you want to see of this game. I've given reasons why it's important, how I think we could implement all of these actions, or why certain objects need to be tuned or others brought up. Think of that same general model as you think of how to improve this game, even if just for fun, which last I checked is the goal of any video game. Entertainment and fun, with a side of hanging out with your friends. If you guys can share this around, if you do agree with it or have anything that resonates with you on it, and reach out to more that can put in their opinion on these ideas as well, it would be greatly appreciated. If it reaches enough ears, perhaps we can see something come of it. I know Bungie's got their hands full with stuff, but I really do hope they can try to add in some of these functions, if not all. And if you don't agree to anything, let me know about that below, or also share it on Twitter and have your own screaming match about how I'm wrong. That's fine too. Those likes, comments, shares, and etc., well, you know what that does for channels you care for. To all of you, no matter when or where you are, I'll see you next space time. Take care.